Alrighty, guys. We'll be back out here at the booth property, and we'll be meeting up with Polly for the first time today, so that's very exciting. Hopefully, we get some good stories, and we'll stay tuned for all of that. So, like, comment, subscribe if you guys want to follow the story about saving the Booth Public School. Alrighty, I'm Milo Moves. I'm out here at the Booth Public School here with Polly for the first time. Polly, do you have any words about yourself?
I'm really dedicated to saving the school, and I'm delighted you're here to help document what it's like and what it means to a lot of people in the community and elsewhere.
Absolutely. You know, this school has been around for a long time. So could you tell me a little bit of history about the school? You know, how did it start here in Booth? You know, what this might mean to the community?
The Booth School was built by Freeman Irby Booth and his wife, Mildred Ryan Wheat Booth, back starting in 1909. And they first built sort of the 1/3 of the structure to the west as a one-room schoolhouse, wouldn't you know? And they have a pot-bellied stove for heat for the students, you know, in the winter. And there's a basement underneath of clay that was cooler than other buildings tend to have. So it was a little cooler in the summer, which is great when it's 100 degrees.
Yeah, absolutely. Go underneath and hang out down there instead.
The neat thing was that the family, you know, hired the teachers to come, and the community of people here sent their children, you know, from miles away to get basically a free education. I believe that the family valued education very greatly and knew that you really had to be literate in order to handle a lot of things in your life.
Right.
Whether it's going to the store to buy something and that kind of thing, reading, writing, arithmetic.
Yes.
So after they built the school, my mother and aunt attended it.
Oh, wow, okay.
That was their grandchildren. And my grandmother, Dee Dee, and grandfather, Papa, of course, supported the school. Papa and Dee Dee funded the teacher and the principal and kept the school running. Mother used to talk about the little Indian children, you know, American Indians that lived down at Thompson. And she said, Polly, they used to ride the horse bareback from about 3 miles away up the road, and it was gravel then, and tie the horse here in front of the school to graze. And then, of course, after school was over, they'd ride the horse back.
Right back. Wow.
And there were lots of people here. Some spoke English, some didn't speak very good English, but the teachers taught, you know, the whole 5-6 years of classes, you know, in the one room.
Gotcha. So that happened for that duration. So this happened in this room that would have been right over here, the auditorium, or?
Yes.
Okay.
It says auditorium on the front.
And I believe that you were telling me that in 1912 they had added this section of the school as well. Okay.
Yes. This midsection includes what is known as the teacherage. And there are 2 bedrooms in the teacherage where the teachers lived, and there's a kitchen where, of course, they cooked, and a bathroom. That's handy instead of just an outdoor one. And one of the great things was, if the children came in from miles and miles away, walking or riding, there were no automobiles back then,
right?
Even to speak of. Just the first Model Ts came a little bit after that. Anyway, Mother reminded me that if you were a child and you had head lice, you should just come early, and the teacher would wash your hair,
right,
and then set you in the classroom. Also, the 2 bedrooms had chalkboards on the walls. So if you needed a little tutoring and you needed to be away from the main classroom, let's say, you could come in there and write on the chalkboard and get tutored on, whatever course you were, needing help
Yeah.
in. And it's kind of neat because the teachers lived and breathed, this purpose of training the children. And then on this left side, this is where, as Mom said, things got fancy. We had a 3-room schoolhouse instead of just a 1-room.
One room.
So,
Wow, that's pretty incredible. That kind of brings a whole new definition of, living where you work. They physically lived where they work, which is very different for us. Obviously me going to school and in my time is different because, teachers were there until the end of the day and then they went off to their own homes. So that just kind of brings another light of just a different time and, what they were working with in comparison.
yeah, Aunt Dot said everybody has to have a job. It doesn't necessarily matter what the job is, but everybody has a job. So if you lived here, you worked here, you learned here if you were lucky enough to have a school and an education to offer to everybody. And it was helpful for the community to have the education. So Aunt Dot actually preserved the school as what I call a kind of a time capsule. There are pictures of her and her classmates in here going back about 90 years.
Wow.
And that's one reason we sort of keep it boarded up, is that despite the trespassers, hopefully we've managed to keep most of the indoor items of value. It's a constant effort, but there's an old desk inside that's, 1 or 2 of them that are samples of what the kids used when they sat there, with the desks in rows, one behind another. Freeman Irby and Mildred, when they met, went on a trip for their honeymoon, and there's evidence of the trip and the clothing that they had in the trunk at that time.
Wow.
I'm sorry to say that the insects have gotten some of it, but at least you can see the real thing.
Right.
And the Fort Bend Historical Association, Chris Godbold, has come with his gloves, and carefully, pulled out some of the old-fashioned clothing and, laid it down very carefully. I'm still in the process of documenting what's inside, hopefully, with Chris's help.
So there's a lot of historical value, not just the building itself, but within the building that,
I
is
think
still.
so. I feel a sense of the place from the architecture.
Yeah.
Mother told all 3 of her children that she was hoping we would save the school because of its architectural value. And I really feel that's helpful. It's true, because in a story like this conversation, you can kind of see, oh yeah, what makes sense. And the inside is awfully dusty. Your throat will burn with whatever's
in the air.
in there. But as we go through it and sort it out, hopefully without damaging it anymore after this century, you get a sense for how the people really lived. It's their actual stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's something that really is an invaluable object, because the more as the years progress, the more likelihood that we're going to lose those things in other places. So it's important to preserve them where we know that they're at.
Yeah, there's a benefit to seeing how they've aged,
Yes.
good or bad.
Exactly.
It makes you realize you only have limited time for what you can do and what the community can do to save the history. That's my goal of.
Yeah, absolutely. And this isn't the only building that you've told me about that is the history of Booth as well. And there's other places that could possibly be restored, but this is kind of the epicenter. This is where it needs to start in order to slowly get those other places up to spec.
I like your noun, the epicenter. My friend Linda Roseborough, who's helped me just incredibly, has told me, Polly, you know what the one single thing is that keeps people from accomplishing their goal, you know, like saving the school. And I said, what? She says, losing focus and getting distracted by other missions.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh no.
Yeah.
So yes, I can tell you about the house across the street where the family lived, with the governess in the third story, and they could overlook
Wow.
the railroad track and the road, to where they're building the school. When my grandmother was a little girl, I can tell you about the oldest single standing building. It's called the commissary, where they had a bank and a cot and a bookkeeper, and
Wow.
the farmers brought their produce, and the butcher would butcher a calf, let's say every week, for the 40 families that lived here and worked on the farm, on the crops, and used the depot and the railroad train to ship goods across into Richmond and across the country. All of that was just really important, and that it's a story where everybody has a story that I believe is worth telling. Whether you feel it at the moment or not is an issue. But I just decided I would focus on the school because this is the place that my mom asked her children to save.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of family legacy that is involved with that. And in the past, you mentioned the Good Samaritans, and I've even thought about the Good Samaritans of Booth specifically, because
I wish they were all gathered around.
Yeah, that
there
would
are
be
dozens.
amazing.
And I really want you to meet them. The Cowboys come every year, 2-3 times a year, to cut the hay that grows in the schoolyard in the summer. Right now, the wildflowers are gorgeous.
Yeah,
and so they'll die off in seed, and after that, they've gone to seed. That's when the Cowboys will come in and make a dozen bales of hay here, and off to the barns or the different pastures where it's needed. When there's a drought, you can use that hay, of course, because you don't have enough grass. The hay can last if you keep it protected for a couple of years. It takes a lot of hay baling equipment, and they do a fantastic job.
Absolutely.
And
so is that one of the ways that you've been able to at least protect this property for the time being, just because of its agricultural value?
Yeah, the agricultural appraisal value is important for the acres to the west, and there are about 8 of them, and then the acres to the south, there's about 680 acres there that used to be used more for crop. But this 2-acre area of the school is actually taxed as a citified non-ag tax. So I just feel it's still sufficiently important to save it with the higher tax. And so the 3 co-owners have tax, because you lose your right to own the land if you don't. But I've spent an extra $400,000 or $500,000 to put in the foundations underneath on my own, try to make the repairs that are needed. Unfortunately, the windows now are all boarded up because most of them have been broken by people that just don't really know what they're doing.
Haven't really thought through it,
Yeah, and everybody's young at some point and doesn't necessarily realize that each window can cost somebody several $1,000. But I think if it becomes a community center, which was one of the ideas that my mom had, then it'll be safer with people
Absolutely.
here.
Well, and that's even something that I thought about personally. You know, the fact that a lot of this land is, you know, under, you know, it's a likelihood that it'll end up getting developed. Having a center like this, hopefully not, but having a community center like this will actually bring a better self-value of what the town of Booth really is, where it came from, having its roots. So that would, you know, that just, for me, screams opportunity.
Um, I do feel that way. Everybody has a different view,
Yeah.
and I respect that. Most people don't have a history of 5 generations and the stories that have been passed down from those generations. You don't have to be related by blood, by the way. You can receive the news just by living around here and talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's in history books. That's how we preserve a legacy of a community, and, you know, really as a greater part of, you know, I think is a part of America, just because in comparison to, you know, other countries, we have such a short span of history.
Yeah,
and
that's
all
true.
all the little places make up a bigger picture of something that at the end of the day I think is pretty grand, and, you know, is really quite an epic.
Yes. And one thing that's really important to me is that when I grew up, I enjoyed knowing that there were 2, 3, 4, 5 generations here that knew each other and helped each other. I mean, you more or less had to help each other
Yeah.
to survive and eat.
Absolutely.
Raise your livestock, survive the flood. The floods used to come right up here to the eastern side. And believe it or not, this Booth School is built up a few feet higher so that it would be almost as high as the railroad track. And that's why I believe that the inside of the Booth School has not yet flooded on this first floor.
That makes sense.
We have all sorts of educated engineers that make forecasts of water flow, but we have horribly increased flooding and damage from the Brazos River floods, hurricanes, cement that drains off this way. But for some reason, the engineers that helped Freeman Irby make an easement for the railroad track, they had enough common sense to have marked already how high the water went and know that they needed to raise the railroad track and raise the Booth School property before they started building. Smarter than some development.
Yeah, that's for darn sure.
That's going to be pretty much it for the Booth Public School here. I really enjoyed talking with Polly. We ended up discussing more about the Booth Public School afterwards, and just kind of generally getting to know each other. Really cool lady, and I'm excited to share this content with you guys. Hopefully we'll get some more interviews, hopefully some better quality interviews here in the future. But I am excited to show you guys this slow and arduous journey, and they've been working on this project for years now, you know, dating back to 2014. Reading some of the small manuscripts that they put together about the history of this and how much work and time and effort that they put into it just really is a very meaningful thing to the historic, you know, the history of this area. And I think it's important to have some sort of a community, especially if this is going to be an expanding community, for people to have a sense of identity in that. And I think that's important. It's important for the people of Booth, and I think it's important as an American to know exactly where you're coming from. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Hopefully there will be more content on the way. And if anything else,
I hope you enjoyed this video. Milo moves.